Good afternoon, everyone, and hopefully you're able to tune in this afternoon for a little bit um, to join me as I share a little bit of my own story this afternoon and dialogue about some questions that have been passed my way in recent days. And like I say, if you're not able to join me this afternoon, know that that's okay. This Q&A will end up going being posted to my personal Facebook page, and so if you're not able to tune in and join in the discussion this afternoon for a few minutes, that's okay. We'll keep it up there so you can view it later at a time that's convenient for you. Like all of you, um, we have been saddened. Our hearts have been wrenched by the events in Nova Scotia. And so this afternoon, I simply want to begin this time before I even get into the Q&As and what's, even going on in my own life. I want to take time this afternoon to simply pray. And I invite you to, if you are a person of prayer, to pray with me in silence and in community for the people of Nova Scotia, and that through this time they would know that they are loved and that we are grieving with them. We don't understand their pain. We may not understand the heartache that they experience, but may you, people of Nova Scotia, know today that we stand with you during this very difficult hour. And so, again, I just want to invite you to join me in prayer in the silence of your homes this afternoon, friends, as we begin this time before we look at some of the questions that have come forward and me sharing a little bit of my own story. Let's spend some time in prayer for the people of Nova Scotia. Eternal God, I'm not even sure how to step into this. Eternal Father, I first of all want to begin by acknowledging your presence with us and your presence in Nova Scotia. Would you be there? And even though it may not be felt, may love that is eternal wrap around the so many families, communities, the RCMP family, the leaders in these communities, the schools, the homes. Would you be there? Would you be present? Father, I confess, I don't understand what has gone on and what continues to be uncovered as these unthinkable events have and continue to unfold. But Father, one thing I do know this afternoon is that in the midst of grief and mourning, you are there, walking, present. And so, Father, that is what I ask for this afternoon. Your presence to be real, to be near. And Father, may the people of Nova Scotia know today that they are loved far and wide. Not only by the people here in their sister province of New Brunswick, but across this great country of Canada and across the globe. We send our love, our grief, our tears through the presence of your Spirit to them today. Go, Father, and be near. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who, like so many today, experienced the pain physically, emotionally, and yet now is present. Amen. Thank you, friends, for praying with me. And I know that our prayers continue to go with the people of Nova Scotia. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're a person of prayer, feel free to join us again tonight at 6:30. We're going to be gathering together again. I'm privileged to pastor a local church here in the Fredericton community, in the nearby community of Nashwauk Sis, and we're going to be spending time in prayer tonight for that. And so we invite you to join us. And if you're wondering how to get connected with that, all you need to simply do is go to YouTube, and when you go to YouTube, just simply type in Nashwauk Sis Baptist Church, and you'll find the links there for our YouTube channel and how to get connected with us tonight. You can also, if it's easier, you can also just go to the church's website, and that's just nbchurch.ca, and that may actually be easier than trying to do the search through YouTube. Just go to nbchurch.ca, and we welcome you to join us in prayer tonight as we continue to remember and walk these days with our dear friends in Nova Scotia. And just saying hi to a few folks texting through online. By the way, feel free to text in as we go along. If you have a thought or two, feel free to share in this conversation. As I get started with this conversation, I guess maybe one of the first things I should do is give a shout out to a fellow pastor friend of mine who currently pastors in Nova Scotia in the community of Yarmouth, and that's AJ Pleasure. And AJ pastors a church down there. And a few weeks ago, he was doing this very thing. He mentioned to the people that he pastors that he'd be doing live Q&As, and he's continued to do that over the past few weeks. And I've been privileged to pop in and see some of his discussions together with the people down there, and enjoyed hearing from AJ, and been privileged to know AJ for a very long time. A bit of a funny story, actually. AJ, and if you happen to watch this later, AJ, you may not even know this, but many years ago, when I was just a young boy, AJ's dad served as my pastor at a small church in a rural community where I grew up in Eastern Ontario. And of course, AJ was just a baby at that time. And I remember one time in particular, I like I say, I was just a young boy, and our church at that time had what we called junior church. And basically, if you're not familiar with that concept, what it meant was for all us young kids, if we didn't want to stay and listen to the pastor preach, we could go out with some wonderful volunteers, and they would share wonderful stories about Jesus and God's love. And I had just reached the age where I was, I guess you could say, technically
too old to go to junior church, and I was visibly upset sitting in the pew that morning. So much so that I don't know as if my mom knew knew what to do. And AJ's dad from the platform simply looked down at me and he's just like, "Do you want to go? Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Mm-hmm, mm-hmm." And Jack's like, "It's all right, you can go." And so AJ's dad just graciously said, "You go on and enjoy uh, junior church." And it's just one of those fun memories as a kid that has stuck with me over the years. I've always appreciated AJ's dad's sense of humor and being able to connect with him at different times over the years. And so AJ, like I said, if you happen to get on and watch this at some point, huge shout out to your dad for his ministry to me, and glad to so appreciate what he's doing. Hey, Brad, want to say hi to Brad Pond. Brad is joining us this afternoon. Brad's become a good friend of mine in recent days as we've worked together with the Leo Hayes men's hockey team, and so it's been so good to get to know Brad over this last hockey season. My oldest son had the privilege of playing on the men's hockey team this year, and unfortunately, like many, wasn't able to finish their season, and they do regret not being able to do that, but certainly understand, the circumstances behind it, and why that couldn't take place. And I'm going to talk a little bit this afternoon just about my own love for hockey and different things. But one of the first questions I kind of want to jump into. Hey, Mary Beth, how are you? Good to see you join us. One of the first questions I want to jump into is, and many of you know me, and you know a little bit about my story, and you've seen me around in the community, at the hockey rinks, the ball fields, and maybe even a church service somewhere. One of the questions I get asked from time to time, it's not one that comes up in conversation a whole lot. Hey, John. By the way, John, I am going to get to your question about George Younce and J.D. Sumner in a minute, so just hang in there, my friend. If you're wondering who John is, everybody, a great old college buddy of mine, great Michigan guy, and good to see John on the chat this afternoon. But as I was saying, sometimes I get asked about the function or maybe lack thereof of my right hand. Like there's certain things I can't function, and you'll see even now how my fingers in my left hand are moving and my right hand is not. And why is it like that? What's going on there? And really, the real simple answer is it's something I've known since birth. I had a stroke when I was 4 days old, and it just left me with some physical limitations on the right side of my body. And one of those was there were certain things I could not, and to this day, can't physically do with my right hand. And I'd be lying to you if I didn't say at times that really frustrated me. If I would be lying to you if I said sometimes it doesn't make me angry. And I'd be lying to you if I said sometimes it doesn't make me angry at God. But let me unpack that a little bit. And because the other thing, and sometimes, and this is another question I've been asked, and I've even been said this. So people have said this to me, and they've said, well, it's got to be a lack of faith. I mean, come on. God's an all-healing God. He can heal you, right? Like, why don't you just pray for healing? Your faith isn't strong enough. God's got this. He can make your right hand just like your left hand. The reality is, friends, we all deal with setbacks in life, and they all look different. And for whatever reason, this is one of those physical setbacks I've dealt with all my life. Now, one thing I want to be very clear on is, though, as I mentioned earlier, this is something I've dealt with since birth. It's not like I was 10 years old and I had to relearn physical motor skills and how to do things. I mean, like when I played baseball as a kid, picked the ball up with the left hand, threw with the left hand, type with one hand, still do, play the piano with one hand. And that, to me, that's normal. Okay, that's just I don't know any different. To be physically how you move, do things with two hands. I don't know that world. That world um, isn't mine. So as I said, there's times I got angry at God. I remember one time, particularly in college, I remember going into the practice rooms, listening to some of my peers. They were piano majors and just playing some beautiful sonatas and concertos, and I'd be like, God, why can't I do that? I could hear all this beautiful music up here, but I couldn't do it here, and I was really frustrated by that. But as I walked through my time in university, and I was very fortunate to be around some very godly professors who just very caringly and with very much a listening ear um, took me under their wing and helped me to understand that there's a bigger and a larger story in all of this. And for me, part of that was being a voice major at university. I studied voice. I continue to teach to this day at Long McQuaid. Love it. Love teaching on Mondays. Love those kids. It's so much fun. Um, why can't I do those other things musically? And what I've come to realize, friends, is that that wasn't the capability that God gave to me. He gave me the gift of a voice, and it's something that I've been privileged to be able to use in different contexts over the years, and I've been so grateful for that. And like I said, to be totally honest, there's times I really do wish I had the capability to be able to use it more, but for whatever reason, I don't understand the why, but that's okay. I just leave it right there, and the other thing I would say is it's not a lack of faith. I just know very simply it's a part of my story, and God's been able to use me in other ways, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And so, staying with the music front, here we go, John. John and I go way back, college buddies. John, fellow bass singer in chorale, and we're actually hoping to be a part of a really neat project here in the coming week or two with the current director of music of the chorale at Indiana Wesleyan. He's invited all former members of that choir to create a virtual legacy choir, and he sent us a piece of music to rehearse, and we're to send it back, and looking forward to being a part of that in the next few weeks. But as I say, John, fellow baritone bass singer, he and I listened to a number of Southern gospel albums, and we would debate back and forth, and we would try and sing low notes and go lower and all this. And so the other day, as we were kind of chatting offline a bit, he just threw it out there and he said, "Okay, I gotta know Southern gospel bass singers. Who's the guy? Is it George Younce or is it J.D. Sumner?" Well, I told him I'd be happy to debate it, so I'll just throw it out there. And here it is, John. Let me first start with JD. And JD, probably best known for his time working with Elvis Presley. Also sang with the Stamps for a number of years. For a number of years, he held the world record in the Guinness Book for the lowest bass singer, hitting the double low C. And like I say, he held that record for a long, long time. Probably the two pieces that I would reference as far as his lower notes and how they would come out would be Poor Wayfaring Stranger. He hits a low E a few times in there, pretty consistent. And then also there's a gospel piece called Peace in the Valley, where he hits a low F at the end and it just kind of rumbles through. Now here's the thing with JD, and for those of you that are not musical, let me just point it this way, and John, you can chime in here and chat and go, wait a second, if you want. Here's the thing with JD. He might be considered, and probably still is considered, one of the lowest bass singers of all time. But a lot of it, to me anyway, it sounded like vocal frying. Basically, like I said, for those of you who may not be into some of those more musical terms, to put it very, very simply and very bluntly, a lot of times in JD, you go down there and he's one of those low notes, he just sound like a frog. It kind of sound like this. It just sounds like a frog. there's pitch there, but there's no real tone and quality to it. So there's my thoughts on JD. Now, George Younce. George was quite a character. Toured for almost 50 years with a group called the Cathedral Quartet. He and Glenn Payne, who was the lead singer for a number of years, led that group through a number of transitions. Yeah. You want my simple answer, John? George, hands down. The song that comes to mind that would nail it for me with George is Echoes from a Burning Bush. Again, it's an old gospel tune. There's a couple times there's a phrase there towards the end. He goes down and hits a low G, and it's just open, it's full, and he holds on to it like crazy. It's just massive. If you're interested in gospel music, I tell you right now, if you want to debate, I tell you, go YouTube, Poor Wayfaring Stranger, J.D. Sumner, then YouTube, Echoes from a Burning Bush by George Younce, and you come to your own conclusions. But for me, it's George Younce, hands down. So that's where it is. So I thank you, John, for pulling that in there. I want to switch gears a bit back to the hockey front. As I mentioned, and I saw Brad was on our chat today, and Brad and I have had a chance to know each other this past year working with Leo Hayes Hockey. Love being able to work with them. I've been privileged the last 3 years to serve as the chaplain for the men's hockey team at the University of New Brunswick. Just so appreciate getting to know those guys, Coach Mack, and the program that he has running there, and the record of excellence. And again, very unfortunate that they weren't able to defend their national title. They were literally 3 games away. My heart aches and still aches for them, especially for the seniors. Those guys were looking to finish strong, and they had one goal in mind throughout the year, and it was just unfortunate that they weren't able to defend their title. And I've also been privileged the last few seasons to serve as the chaplain for the Youth Hockey Association right here in Fredericton. Huge thanks to their general manager and the president for allowing me the opportunity just to visit with families and be present in their lives. And sometimes one of the questions I get asked by folks is like, okay, wait a second, this is hockey. Where does faith come into this, and how do the two of them go together? What does that really look like? I mean, hockey's hockey, and you leave the faith, leave the religious side out of it. And I've thought about that, and oftentimes, and I actually gave a workshop a while back to some youth on that very thought. And I think for me, as I look at that, I think one of the things you need to keep in mind when we look at the well-being of an athlete, or the well-being of any of us, really, whether we're an athlete or not, and that is that we have our physical well-being, our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, but also our spiritual well-being. And it's this spiritual well-being of the athlete and the family that I just try and key in on with families, with the guys at UNB and with the families with the Fredericton Youth Hockey, and just be present for them when they bring the questions to me. And I'll be the first one to confess, there are times when I simply do not know. I don't have an answer, but just to be a listening ear for them. We'll chat about passages from the Bible. I'll share a bit of my faith perspective, what I know as a pastor in a local Christian church, and what that looks like, and we'll pray together, and just let the people know that I'm there, that I'm present. And so from that perspective, to simply answer the question, do faith and sports coexist? Absolutely. And part of my reasoning for where I get that and what that looks like, Psalm 139, which says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb, and I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well." And that is to simply even remind myself at times, and this goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning of the conversation, about the lack of function in my right hand. It's to know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And I would say the same to any athlete. Remember that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. You've been given an incredible talent, to play the game of hockey, to enjoy it, and I'm privileged there to witness it. I'm privileged to, do the public address, be the crazy music guy, bring the pump up energy into the room, and love being able to do that, and what that looks like. So, you know, for me, when I look at that, that's very much how faith and sports, and for me specifically, the game of hockey, how they really do come together. Um, I guess this afternoon, you know, one of the questions that's on all of our minds is, where do we see God in a crisis like this? And maybe to tie into that, a question that was emailed to me this morning. Why does God let things like this happen? I've thought about that a little bit, and as I've reflected on it, I've thought of some old words from Solomon. Solomon was a king in ancient times, and he has some writings that are recorded in the Bible, and he shares these words, and I just want to read them to you and then maybe unpack it a little bit. He says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. He walks with and interacts with his creation." And you should know that those last words were mine. Let me say those last words again. They were mine, not Solomon's, but mine. And he walks with and interacts with his creation. And I share that only to say, for me personally, that's kind of my summary of those words that I just read of Solomon's. I think sometimes it's very easy for us as humanity to ask that question, why. It's often the default question. It's the one, it's our go-to. We ask why. And then in asking why, we want to place blame, whether it be on somebody else, maybe it's in our own home, or on a neighbor, on a friend, government, wherever. We want to place the blame somewhere else. And maybe even eventually, we want to place that blame on God. And I guess for me, friends, what I've come to, and to be honest, it's something I'm still unpacking. It's something I'm still trying to understand. But when I read the question, and I've asked the question, why does God let things like this happen? My simple answer is, I don't know. But I wonder, friends, if that's the wrong question, especially in times like this. Instead of asking the question why, would we not be better served to ask the question, how can we, as God's creation, how can we as God's creation interact and serve and love each other? And I really believe in part that's what we're seeing through this pandemic. We're hearing stories all the time from various places all across the country, how people are reaching out in kindness, whether it's to support their local business or even, kids sharing simple signs. I'm sure many of you that if you live right here in New Brunswick, you might have seen the report just the other day. Some kids had got some simple signs together with cardboard and letters and provided them and sent them to Dr. Russell's home, our chief medical officer here in the province. To me, that is just a wonderful expression of love and thanks in times like this. And it truly does get our mind off of the why question. And let me be very clear. I'm not saying that that's a question we don't wrestle with. It's a question we don't ask. It is. I've asked it, even in recent weeks, in recent days. But as I said, I wonder if it's the wrong question. Because again, in asking why and doing so, what do we look to do? We look to place the consequences, the actions on somebody else. When perhaps maybe God is saying to you, maybe he's saying to me, how can you, as my creation, take responsibility and be a part of the solution for what we're going through right now as a human race? Now, maybe for you, maybe that's a little bit too simple. I don't know. And the other thing I would say, friends, is this. This is me simply sharing out loud with you my own thoughts. And very simply say, I don't have all the answers. One of the things I love, and to tie this back into the comments about the chaplaincy thing with the hockey program, earlier this season, I had some people question, why are you doing this? Like, where, maybe we need to leave the chaplaincy thing away from the game. Maybe that's not the proper place for it. I read a quote a little while ago, and it says this. It says, if you are doing something worthwhile, questions will always be asked. People may be critical of you, and know that that's okay. And that's something I've tried to live by, and know that people aren't always going to agree with what I say, and that's okay. I think it's okay to agree to disagree. It's a lesson I learned a number of years ago from my uncle when I was privileged to serve with him in a local church, and I'm so thankful to that lesson that he taught me many years ago, and it's one that I'm still learning to this day, as I'm sure we all are. And I say that to say this, friends. I invite the conversation. I invite the questions, that we would dialogue together as humanity, and continue to walk in love and respect for our fellow human race, those especially who wouldn't share the same faith perspective, the same beliefs that we do. And one of the reasons I share the faith that I do is because I truly believe in it. I truly believe there is a hope in it. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I wouldn't be living and sharing in the life of a local pastor. I so appreciate the sacrifice of my wife and my kids. They give up so much for me to do this, and I'm so grateful for their sacrifice in that, because I know that, again, within this faith that I endeavor to live out daily, sometimes I slip up, sometimes I make mistakes, but I know that there's a real hope there, and there's a real hope in the person of Jesus. And I guess maybe that's the last question I kind of want to leave us with this afternoon. And then, like I say, when we're done, feel free to email me, feel free to text me, call me. I want to keep this conversation going. I want to learn from you as much as maybe you might gain insight from something I've shared. And that is to leave you with this question. Does Jesus really have the authority of God? If you want the real simple short answer from me and from my perspective, friends, does Jesus really have the authority of God? One word answer for me, yes. But here's where I would challenge all of us. Don't take my word for it. Don't take my simple one word answer, yes. I mean, we love to investigate. We're a people of, there's got to be more to it than that, Chris. Come on. What I would say to that? Don't take my word for it. Check it out for yourself. In a prayer that Jesus shared for his disciples just before he was put to death, you find this in John's account. It's in the New Testament of the Bible, the fourth book of the New Testament, John chapter 17. Verse 11, these are the words of Jesus. And he says, I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world. And I am coming to you, Holy Father. Protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as you and I are one. And what I find so interesting there, friends, in that verse, and that's not the only time you see Jesus referencing that he and the Father are one. But what we discover in that is that yes, Jesus as God's Son is God. He is holy, like God. It was interesting just this past weekend as the Christian community celebrated Easter. I saw a question come across a question come across my Twitter feed, and it said this. It said, if Jesus had not risen from the dead, would we have heard of him? Let me say that again. If Jesus had not risen from the dead, would we have heard of him? And I think the short, simple answer to that question is no. I mean, his death would have been recorded in the history books, and that would have been the end of it. He would have gone down in history as a very pleasant, very compassionate person. He did some neat things. But here's the interesting thing, friends. That's where the story didn't end. He did not stay dead, but he rose again. How did that happen? Only through the power of the eternal Father. And for me, as a follower of Jesus, that's where I find my hope. That's where my hope stays in. When all these questions are coming at me just like you, and we're wondering, how's the next day going to turn out? How are we going to get through this? What's it going to look like? I can simply lay all my questions at the feet of Jesus. Hey, Shelley, good to see you as well. Look forward to connecting with you again. Nice to have you on the call. That's where my hope stays, friends. I can rest in that, and I can know that he is always present. And one of the things I've recently been sharing with my own congregation that I'm privileged to serve is, when you're struggling, when you have those questions and you're not sure where to turn, and not to say that we can't continue to ask the questions. Know that asking the questions is okay. But rest in the one who is the answer. And his name is Jesus. And I'm so grateful that we can leave it right there. And for me to take this right back to the first question I addressed and shared with you guys this afternoon about, my hand and not being able to do some of those other things. I still question. I still struggle with it at times. But I know it's a part of my story, and it's a part of the way Jesus is walking with me. And he is journeying that with me as I've welcomed him in to be a part of that. And he's not condemned my questions. He's not put me down because of my questions, but he's wanted to understand and know my perspective and what that looks like. And so I hope this afternoon, through some things that I've shared, maybe it stirred some questions in your own faith and your own heart, and that's great. I'd love to continue to dialogue with you in that. And like I said, if you know some friends that maybe didn't get a chance to take part live this afternoon, that's okay. This video is going to go up on my Facebook page, and I'll leave it there for an extended period of time. And like I say, I welcome the dialogue. I love Jesus with all my heart. So thankful for my family, for my wife and my kids, and the sacrifice that they make day in and day out for me to be able to be here, away from them here at the church office, and serve the people of Fredericton, whether that be through the avenue of hockey, baseball, being that crazy public address guy, but just share the love of Jesus in community and walk together and walk alongside people of different faiths and different backgrounds, and to know that together we walk in the love of an eternal God. So thanks for joining me this afternoon, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do this again sometime real soon. But take care, everybody. Stay safe out there, and yes, John, I'll just put one last punch in there for you. Go Sens.